In a world where talent is evenly distributed, but venture capital is concentrated in coastal silos, smart startup money is heading for the Midcon. Welcome to the Midcon Markup, a podcast that uncovers the inspiring stories of our visionary tech entrepreneurs and the investors who believe in them. I'm your host, Cody Merrill with Cortado Ventures. Listen, learn, and make your Midcon Markup.
Welcome to another episode of the Midcon Markup. Today, we are fortunate to be here with Cortado LP, Brad Richardson.
Cody, hi, how you doing?
Doing great. Why don't you tell us what you're currently working on, and a little brief summary of your career, and then we'll take a step back, and I want to know about the childhood.
Okay, well, let's start with kind of the career then, and it gets probably to where I am now. Grew up here in Oklahoma City. I guess that's a little childhood, but went to SMU and started out in commercial real estate. I always liked commercial real estate and worked for Metropolitan Life Insurance in the real estate division and lived in Chicago, Atlanta, Dallas, moved around, did different things. Part of the time I was on an investment committee, so learned a lot about the national real estate. But when I moved to Dallas, I was what's called an asset manager. And so at that point, I was actually just managing certain properties. And I'm probably 25, 26 years old and have a $100 million portfolio of properties I'm managing, some of which were here in Oklahoma. So Leadership Square was a property that we owned. I managed it. Same with in Tulsa, we had the Warren Place office buildings and the Doubletree Hotel as well.
Were you working with Trammell Crow or?
No, so MetLife actually owned those properties.
Got it.
So as a large company, they have asset managers who oversee certain parts of the portfolio. And then on site, we actually had people that did the day-to-day management and leasing. But ultimately, they kind of reported to me, at least here in Oklahoma.
But your formative years were in real estate.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a passion of mine early on. I've always loved it.
And then as you progressed throughout your career, you ultimately ended up at Paycom.
Well, but in between, I had some time. My grandfather started here in Oklahoma City, Richardson Ford. And so after having worked in commercial real estate, my father also told me, then my father was renting at the time. He said, there's two requirements before you can come back and work at the dealership. One, you have to spend 5 years doing something other than working for me. That's how I got into commercial real estate. And like I said, did that for 8 years. And number two was you have to go sell cars for a year because you have to know what that's like. You can't just walk in here and be the boss's son without some of that kind of experience. At the time, I had my MBA and I was in commercial real estate, and I kind of just downplayed everything and applied for a job in Dallas with AutoNation, if you remember, that's Wayne Huizinga's company. And he was, the one price selling, and that was kind of a new concept. So I wore my polyester pants, my polyester green and white striped uniform, my name badge, and I went to work and sold cars. So
was it humbling going from managing a $100 million portfolio of commercial real estate to car salesman, a job that, while can be lucrative, does not require a bachelor's degree, let alone an MBA, let alone very prestigious commercial real estate, asset management, professional experience?
Yeah, there's no doubt it was. But it was also, it was, to me, it means to an end. I knew that eventually I would get through that part of my life and I would, be, managing or working with my father at the dealership. So yeah, it was definitely, a step back in my career, but that was all part of it. And it was kind of fun. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. And one price at the time was kind of a new concept. So, I did learn some stuff that actually would prove to be kind of important going forward.
Selling cars is one of those commodity sales jobs where there's somebody across the street selling a similar car. How would you differentiate yourself? How did you strive for excellence in such a brutally competitive sales process?
Well, it's always a challenge. Really it comes down to the relationship you have with the customer, and you have to have the product too. If you don't have the right product, then that becomes a hard sale. And on a used car lot, sometimes you have the right fit, sometimes you don't. But you can work through a lot of that just by having a relationship with people. And it's a really interesting way to read people. And even there, and then when I was in the car business with my father, is there's a perception of these car salesmen are just, out to get you, take advantage of you, take your money. And as I got to know the people, I mean, they're just people. They're just, they're a lot of good people. And the way people would walk in and they're on guard and they're kind of short with you. They don't really, want to give you the time of day. And as you start to develop this relationship, I mean, you see it every time somebody walks in. And so it's kind of fun, the psychology of the whole thing. But you see the people's attitudes change over time. And by the time that you've actually sold them a car, you're shaking their hands, you know their kids' names. I mean, you formed a friendship with them. So it really changes, but it starts out very, very tense just because of the customer. They're just, that's the perception.
Who lies more in the conversation between the car buyer and the car seller on the lot?
Well, the car buyer is always telling you they're just shopping. I mean, so you know that. Okay, so, but which, by the way, is a lie. You just don't go to a car dealership to just shop. I mean, as if you're not intending to buy at some point. But, the car salesman, what's probably wrong is they may say something because they don't know the right answer. And the best answer is, I don't know, I'll find that out for you. And, back then, this was 20 years ago or 25 years ago, you didn't have the access to information like you do now. So the knowledge really was in the car salesman, but they didn't know everything. There's too much to know. But you didn't have the internet. Everybody could look at it right away and get the right answer. So you would have to find out a lot of stuff.
You go from car lot salesman to working in the family car business here in town. How expansive was that family business, and how did you work your way up in that organization? And then ultimately, I got to know, how did you get to Paycom from commercial real estate to car sales?
Fair enough. So after the 1 year, I moved back and started with my father, and he put me as assistant general manager. So I had no real authority at that time because I knew how to sell cars, but I just didn't know the inner workings of the dealership. In the car business, they have NADA, the National Automobile Dealers Association. They have an academy, so it's an amazing program. So I would fly to DC, where the headquarters is, or actually the Dulles area, and I'd go through, spend a week in class, and then we would go work in that department. So you have the parts department, the service, new car sales, used cars, accounting, and so all the different departments. So I would literally rotate through each of those over about the 6-week period, and then have a class in DC to cover that.
So you'd come back to the family business, rotate through each of those departments, and then go to the class, and then continue until you had worked your way through every department.
Exactly. So it was a great experience. I mean, it's a really good way to learn the business. You're hands-on. You're asking questions, and you're kind of doing some of those roles. And so, I knew a little bit about, selling after having done that for a year, but I really didn't know anything about the parts department. That's a big part of it, for service. And so the academy taught me quite a bit. So it really was a great experience.
Where does the profit really come from in dealerships?
Well, and it's probably even changed since I was there, but back then it was the service department of the parts. I mean, there's a greater markup in that. And also used cars. Nobody really knows what you have in a used car. Now it's with the internet. I mean, it's a great equalizer. Everybody knows basically what a car should sell for. All you have to do is put in a 2015 Toyota Camry or Ford Explorer, and 20 of them will pop up, and you kind of limit maybe the mileage of the car or the distance from the dealership, but you kind of focus on that. You'll have 4 or 5 cars, and they're probably all going to be within $1,000 or so. If one's $5,000 more, obviously that's not going to sell, or there's something very different about it. So I think it's more the service department and the parts department. That's probably where it is. Selling new and used cars is a method to get it out there, and then to fix them over time. I mean, that's your goal. And then there's also the finance department. I didn't really mention that earlier, but that's also a big area that where you selling warranties. You make money off of that as well. By you guys sell it for a certain thing, and then the actual warranty company, there's a spread between that. So money's made that way as well.
how many dealership locations did you guys have? And then,
well, so here's what's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we had one Ford dealership. So my father over the years had bought and sold several different dealerships. One time we had the DeLorean franchise in Oklahoma City, and that was when I was growing up. In fact, I turned 16. That was the first car I drove for about a week, and then my dad wouldn't let me drive anymore, but he let me drive that for a little while. That turned out to be very interesting just because DeLorean, while it looked cool, the quality was just absolutely terrible. I mean, we kept one DeLorean on the dealership lot in order to fix all the other ones because, the quality just was not there. They weren't real quick. They handled pretty well because they were kind of low and had a wide wheelbase, but the car itself was just not a great car. Over time, it may have been, but they never got that far.
so your family business was operating one dealership at a time.
Well, the Ford business goes back to my grandfather, and additional dealerships my father had kind of bought and sold. But after we moved back, while I was going through this academy, Fred Hall, who was chairman of Fred Jones Industries, and Fred Jones had some Ford and Lincoln Mercury dealerships in Oklahoma City. Once all the dealerships merged back together, they were known as the Auto Collection. I'm not sure it's a great name, but that's kind of what Ford came up with. All the dealerships, except for Joe Cooper Ford, I'll give him some credit because he was outside of the metropolitan area a little bit in Midwest City. He didn't sell, but everybody else sold. And in theory, everybody wants a hassle-free experience. And so the way that it would work is, no, everything's priced at one price throughout the Metroplex, and a customer would come in and they would look at the car, and the salesman had already built up all this value in the car. The customer would say, you see the car, see the price, and say, but I don't want to pay that. Or the trade-in, let's say, now my trade-in's out, it's worth more than that. So the customer would come in and they would look at the vehicle. The salesperson would build up the value and explain the whole one price philosophy that, this is a standard price. It's a fair price to everybody. And then you present the price and then the amount of their trade-in, and the customer would say, well, I want more for my trade-in. I don't want to pay that much for a car. And so in theory, they were supposed to say, okay, I will pay that, but they didn't. And then you had Joe Cooper, who would go on TV at night and say, here's $10,000, go to the high mega dealers in Oklahoma City. If I can't beat their price, here's $10,000. So a lot of people would get our price and then take it to Joe Cooper, and he beat them. So I give him a lot of credit. He took a big risk because he went against Ford Motor Company, but he did a good job. And ultimately, it turned out that it was just not successful. Dealers ended up buying back different dealerships, and Ford kind of walked away. The concept sounded good, but in reality, most people still want to negotiate. They want hassle-free, but they still want to negotiate.
I think it's one of those universal truisms that people don't really know what they want. They think that they want one thing, but really they want something else.
Yep, there's no doubt about that.
Okay, so how'd you get from car business to Paycom?
Okay, not quite there yet. So, so at that point, my father and I were kind of done with the auto collection concept, and it was starting to kind of unravel a little bit. And so there was a Toyota dealership for sale. So my father bought the Toyota dealership and put me in as general manager. By that time, I had a fair amount of experience. And so I went and ran it day to day. And I was, the general manager. My father didn't have an office there. So, he trusted me at that point that I knew what I was doing to run that. So then a public company came in called Sonic Automotive, and they had dealerships all across the country, and they were interested in buying our dealership. And I really didn't want to sell it, but my father said, look, you can move up within this company, and it's a nice return on a dealership we've had for a couple of years. So we ended up selling it to them. And for 11 months, they didn't change anything. It was just business as usual. Everything was good. And then after the 11th month, they came in and just changed everything. My manager's pay plans, the way we're doing business, they wanted to standardize it within their organization, which I completely get. I understand it, but it was a big change for us. And my managers, who I thought were very loyal to me, and they certainly were, but when you cut their pay significantly, they had to go elsewhere. So I don't fault them for that at all. So I lost a bunch of my managers. and I had a 1-year employment contract with Sonic Automotive, and the day it was up, I was kind of done.
Okay, so you finished your 1-year contract that you had to have a holdover for the acquisition, and then what?
Well, when I was running the dealership, I joined a breakfast group in Oklahoma City. So there's 30 guys from different industries. And I was the car person. We had people in insurance, electrician, jeweler, all kinds of different industries. And so we meet every Thursday morning, and I'm still in that group. We still do this. And it's a great way just to kind of get, we call it a tip group. So great way to get to know other people, other businesses, and exchange business leads. If I needed some electrical work done at the dealership, I would call Osborne Electric. And, if they were going to buy something, they would, a car, they would come see me. So anyway, started out that way. And then one day, one of the members brought in Chad Richardson, who had started a small little payroll company. And brought him in the group, and so he was the payroll person, and we just became friends and didn't think much about it. But after we sold the dealership, I was trying to figure out, what I was going to do next. So one evening, Chad and I went to dinner just as friends, and we were talking, and I told him I was going to try to figure out something else to do since I'm getting out of the car business. And he said, well, why don't you come work for me and do things, in the payroll world? And I said, well, Chad, I don't know anything about that industry. He's like, well, you can figure it out. So we got 40th employee there, started out trying to figure out, of those products, what was the first thing to get into? And we came up with Cobra, and people kind of ask why Cobra. And Cobra is a horribly complicated law, very difficult to administer, to understand. I knew the word Cobra, but I knew very little bit about it. And I, just dove into it, learned everything I could about Cobra, and ended up writing the specs that we took to the development group at Paycom, and they developed it. So I started out, I was the one in charge of getting it developed, but I also sold it to clients. I administered it. It was just me doing that. Once that got going a little bit, I hired someone, and we were able to, I was able to step away from that. And as it would continue to grow, and got into next thing we got into was background checks, because again, that's a kind of a complicated area, and I knew very little bit about it, but kind of became an expert in that as well. So background checks, and I just kept coming up with different products, and then over time it would grow, and I would kind of step into new roles. So that's kind of how I started. I mean, Paycom at the time had 40 employees, and I went in there to figure out things other than payroll. Chad knew payroll and very well. I mean, all sides of it. But a lot of people in his industry hadn't done much with benefits and background checks and Cobra and just all the other HR functions that could be tied into Cobra. So that's where I started with Paycom, is to kind of figure out what else to get into other than just payroll.
Can you tell us more about other roles that you've had at Paycom?
Sure. So after spending several years and getting several of these products up and running, I moved into the operations side, and which was completely different. I was responsible for managing a lot of people in different departments. So I was overseeing kind of the new client setup area, over customer service, the banking operations, taxes, which is a huge part of any payroll company, making sure all taxes are paid. So that was probably my biggest management roles, with several thousand people and responsible for payroll. And that's a responsibility you cannot take lightly, because as Chad said many times, you get a 99% correct. That's not good enough, not even close.
So you focus on new product development initially, and then transition to overall operations.
That's correct. Exactly. Yeah. Vice president of operations, and I did that for, 5-7 years at Paycom, and just saw incredible growth there. But payroll is such an exact science. It's really an interesting product.
Well, I know that everybody in the tech scene in Oklahoma looks at Paycom as our aspirate North Star, and we're very proud of what you guys have been able to accomplish. And hopefully, 10 years from now, Cortado will have seeded 2 or 3 more Paycom level successes.
Absolutely. And it can be done. I mean, it's really fun to be part of something like that, to see the growth from a small company, and all the people that you bring in get hired, and that was such a key to getting all the right people, and then that stuck through all the challenges of a growth company like that, and kind of rewarded. I spent a day on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and Paycom went public, and then standing behind Jim Cramer on TV. I mean, it's just kind of a pretty neat experience to be part of. So I'm hoping some of these Cortado CEOs get that opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think everybody needs to be reminded that at one point in time, Chad Richardson started as zero revenue.
Absolutely. It was Chad, and then he hired his sister, and they took it from there.
And what year was this?
This was 2005.
Okay.
So Paycom was started in 1998, and so it was 7 years old roughly when I went to work there. A small local payroll company, and it took off from there, obviously.
So it sort of sounds like you going to the dealership university and then coming back to the dealership and then running parts and then service and then just different divisions. And people think of payroll as a monolith, but in reality, the big payroll brands that we're familiar with have a ton of distinct features packaged together that are separate divisions with their own separate complications.
Absolutely. And again, in the beginning, I didn't know any of this, but I figured it out. And I guess it was a little bit of the same model, as I would have to learn part of it, actually become an expert in it, and get it developed, and then move on to the next thing. So it was kind of a little bit of the same concept, just a different industry. But
so you're a professional learner and an operator.
Yes, I've done a lot of learning over time. I actually gave speeches on Cobra, which is about as boring as you could ever imagine, but I got to know it that well.
How do you develop a passion for something so boring, yet very important, and there's a lot of utility meat on the bone?
Well, I guess it's kind of like when we talked about being in that, going back to selling cars. I mean, I guess I kind of stepped backwards in order to step forward, and that's really the same thing I did again. I mean, I was managing several hundred people at a dealership and responsible for revenue and operations, and now I'm a one-person shop speccing out Cobra and trying to sell it. But I knew Paycom was going to grow, and I knew there would be a lot more opportunities, so I was willing to do that because I saw the vision, and so I was willing to step back.
So this, in many ways, parallels the journey of startup founders, where you have to develop an immense amount of expertise in some little niche and then be that one-man band with the passion, the skills, knocking on the doors, talking to customers, finding ways to attract resources and hire talent. What led you to invest in venture capital? I imagine for a number of years you just had a fairly traditional, diversified portfolio. And then at some point, you had quite a bit of success with Paycom, and then you made a decision to be an LP in Cortado. What was that like?
When I left Paycom after 13 and a half years, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And I knew I liked investing, and I had background in commercial real estate, so I made several investments with that. Some are passive, hands off. Other ones I'm a little more involved in. But I wanted to keep doing different kinds of investments and diversification. I really knew very little about venture capital at the time because my whole career I have been focused kind of on the job I'd been doing, and now I had time to look around. And venture capital was one area that I didn't have any exposure to, which, as I want to be more and more diversified, I think that's a great opportunity. So I ultimately learned about Cortado, and the more I heard about it, the more I thought, this is a great thing, good for Oklahoma City, but good for me too. Every investment I make, but number one is what's my return on investment. I mean, I always want to make sure I'm getting a good return on investment. Number two, if I can do something that is beneficial to a city or a community, or it just kind of really interests me, it's a neat development or something. I mean, that's all a kind of a bonus on top of it. But I like to return first.
I think most investors feel that way, and you start making decisions where return isn't the priority, then that's where good intentions can very quickly lead to the road to hell.
Yes, exactly.
Relationship-wise, how did you get introduced to Cortado, and then was it?
Well, so having been somewhat entrepreneurial, I would say, as far as running my own business, and having worked for a corporation like Metropolitan Life and then Paycom, I thought I had a kind of a unique background, and I found out about OCamp and decided to invest or to mentor somebody at OCamp, and so that's kind of how I started out.
What is OCamp?
Okay, so OCamp stands for the Oklahoma Entrepreneurial Mentoring Program, and it aligns about 8 entrepreneurs in Oklahoma City. I guess it's through the state, but my connections were here in Oklahoma City with people that have been in the business world and have some kind of, they could have been entrepreneurs, they could have been executives with different companies, but they partner 2 or 3 of people with experience with an entrepreneur that's trying to develop something, a business, a product, and it's alignment, and you work with them for a couple of years. And through that, I met Susan Mooring, who was very involved with it. And as I was talking to her one time, I said, if something really takes off, do I have an opportunity to invest? And she goes, let me know that was not the goal at all. The goal is to be nothing but a mentor and to try to help the person, but you can't have any financial interest in it. So I said, that's fine. I mean, that wasn't a problem at all. And I got involved. When Susan moved to Cortado, she reached out to me and said, hey, I'm doing something different now, and I'm still working with entrepreneurs, but with the ability to invest with different companies. And so I said, okay, tell me about that. And again, knowing very, very little about venture capital, she kind of, got me up to speed on how it works. So Susan was my connection. So I didn't know Nathaniel at the time, but she made that introduction and got to know him. But that's how I kind of backed into it. It wasn't necessarily that I was looking for venture capital. I wanted to, invest with some small companies that I knew something about and it could have an impact, and then kind of fell right into it. So it's been a perfect fit.
What we found is that there's a lot of successful operators out there who want to pay it forward, want to invest in that next generation of entrepreneurs. And it's a lot easier to start with a venture capital firm where there's a professional pipeline process and diligence process. And then you can get that fund exposure, that diversified fund exposure, very little risk that the whole investment is going to go to zero, far more predictable set of returns. But then you also get exposure to deal flow and get to participate in the syndicates and the SPVs and sidecars.
And I have participated so far in one of the sidecars, so that definitely got my interest. But it kind of feels like you're a little more involved in something. I love coming to these. We just had an annual meeting yesterday, and hearing the different CEOs talk about their business, their vision, where they're going with it. I mean, it's kind of exciting and it's fun. Like I said earlier, I like the return on investment, but I also like the other side of it, which is maybe being a little involved in something that I'm not hands on day to day, because I've done a lot of day to day stuff.
Yeah, it really seems like it energizes you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know it's great, and I love. You guys are great with communicating, and the emails that come out once a month. I read through all those, and I love the wins, and then you're candid when something doesn't work as well. Fortunately, your track record's been pretty good from everything I've seen, so that's always good to see.
Well, I'm delighted to know that at least one person's reading my LP newsletters.
Absolutely. I'm that one then.
All right. I appreciate it, Brad. Anything else that you'd like to share? I feel like we really ran the gambit and covered a lot of great stuff.
Really enjoyed talking to you today. And I've had kind of a unique background, but I guess, in the end, everybody has. They've done different things. I've got a son right now who's in commercial real estate down in Dallas, and with interest rates being, as high as they are, things are just kind of slow. And I keep telling them, look, I've had, 3 or 4 careers in my life. I mean, where you start in life in general is not where you're going to end up. Now, if you're a doctor or a lawyer, maybe, that's the case. But people pivot all the time. It's kind of interesting to see. And but I think every experience you have, kind of you build on that over time, and things you've learned somehow weave itself into your next venture.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. And I think that there's so many parallels from the pivots that you've taken in your career, the way that you've identified opportunities, been a new learner, mastered it, moved on to the next discipline, is great advice for any budding entrepreneur, that you can never plan the future. You just have to live your life in a linear fashion with open eyes and ears and follow your passion, what you like. And eventually you'll stumble into incredible opportunities. And hopefully for everybody out there, you stumble into the next Paycom.
Absolutely. And then look, some of those are going to be born right here in Oklahoma City and through Cortado's investments, I have no doubt.
Well, thank you so much for putting your money with us and funding the next generation of entrepreneurs. We greatly appreciate it and love having you in our community.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Midcon Markup. Please hit like and subscribe for more episodes.